Fisheries and Oceans. Debate. The honourable member for Coast of Bays, Central Notre Dame.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by, before he leaves the House, I wanted to, I know he's being replaced by another speaker, only temporarily, I'm sure. I just wanted to say that when this issue first came in 2004, 2005, I was first elected. I remember the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans at that time was one of the strongest, powerful advocates for the sealing industry that this country has ever seen. That, sir, was you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you very much for that, and we all thank you for your service in that cause. Thank you. Yes. And that wasn't just a way of trying to win favor with the Speaker, by the way. I'm actually serious about the issue. On division, I understand. Okay, Mr. Speaker, this is a very important day for us and also for a wonderful person, former Senator Céline Ville-Payette. She was the champion of this in the Senate back in 2014. The bill died on the order paper. Then it came back, of course, successfully through the House of, or through the Senate. Now here it sits in the House of Commons, and I'm honored to do this. This is National Seal Products Day. We are proposing to vote for May 20th as being that particular day. So first of all, why May 20th? That's a good question. May 20 coincides with the European Union Marine Day. European Marine Day. And the reason why we're doing this, we're not doing this in jest, we're doing this because in the European Union, they spend the full day celebrating the culture of the marine industry, including fishing, including harvesting of animals, including the prosecution of all fisheries around the European Union and the entire continent. So what Senator Payette thought was to have this day to coincide with that day as a way of celebrating what it is we do in the way of harvesting this animal. As we all know, the European Union a few years ago introduced a ban on seal products, of which we vehemently opposed. At the time, we challenged it through the WTO, rather unsuccessfully, but nevertheless, it exists. There was exemption for Indigenous persons, and that I'll talk about in my speech a little bit later. I want to thank, and I understand the member from Caribou Prince George, if I got that correct. Yes, I did. He will be talking about the Indigenous factor for seal products, and I thank him for doing that in advance. I also want to thank the seconder of this bill, the member from Laurentides-Labelle, who was working on this when he used to work for me, you see. He used to work on this quite a bit, so I'm happy to say that he's seconding the bill. It's also very fitting that the mover of this today is from Newfoundland and Labrador, and the seconder is from Quebec, because these are the two provinces that harvested seals the most in the commercial industry. The Gulf seal fishery, because we call it a fishery, even though they're mammals, the Gulf seal fishery, of course, in Quebec, and the other seal fishery, primarily in Newfoundland and Labrador, was called the Front, taking place in April and May. So as we get into this right now, I want to talk about the industry itself and what it has done for the commercial side and the coastal communities. Certainly over the last 10 years, there has been a decline in a major way. By way of illustration, in 2004, $18 million of seal products were exported, primarily in meat, oil, and of course pelts, which was the most at the time. The pelts constitute the garment industry. Garments such as boots, mittens, slippers, bow ties. This one, incidentally, was given to me by the Honourable John Crosby of Newfoundland and Labrador, so I wear it very proudly, as he also was a true advocate for the industry. And recently, he set up a Sealers Memorial in the town of Elliston in Newfoundland and Labrador. So I thank him for this, and I wear it today as such. So anybody have seal products, I suggest you wear them over the next little while. I see some members are wearing their, yes, they are, and thank you for that. So let's look at 2004 again. $18 million in export around the world, primarily in nations such as Norway, Russia, throughout the European Union, some at that point in Asia, not a lot like we have now in China, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, but right at that point was the peak of the industry. One pelt would get you just over $100. Today's pelt price is just under $20. So that gives you an idea just how devastating it has been. A couple other factors as well. Several years of the strong dollar didn't help, and also there have been a substantial amount of ice cover both east of Quebec, the Magdalen Islands, in the Madeleine in particular, and also for Newfoundland and Labrador. That didn't help the situation. So $18 million was the value back then. Today, just over $300,000 represents the amount of exports. So it has taken a downturn. And of course, I mentioned earlier about the ban on seal products in the European Union. Russia has also banned seal products. Not sure about that one, simply because they were also a major importer of seal products. President Putin felt in his infinite wisdom that it was a good thing to do, to ban seal products and put a lot of people out of work. Such is the case. Here in Canada, of course, we do not have a ban, but what we're doing is we have an industry that's being recognized for a humane hunt and humane harvest of these animals. For example, recently, back in 2009, we put through the MMR, the Marine Mammal Regulations, we put through a three-step process for a kill of a particular seal. It's mandatory training now for commercial license holders to do this. The independent group of veterinarians, an international group, by the way, said a while ago that it represented a humane harvest, more humane in many cases of domesticated animals, and certainly more humane than other hunts that took place throughout Europe. I'll give you an example. Several years ago, I put a motion in the House to ban lederhosen. I kid you not. The reason why I did that was this. Did you know there's an unregulated hunt that takes place with deer and boar animals in Germany? They harvest it primarily through Bavaria, but basically it's an unregulated hunt, not as regulated as the seal hunt is here. So the harvesting of seals is very regulated. Their wild hunts are not so much. So I put a motion in the House, since they were going to ban seal products, it makes sense that they were killing all these animals to create lederhosen. It never got to a vote. And I did it in jest, yes I did. But nevertheless, I wanted to make the point that if you're going to do this, if you're going to say that the harvesting of seals is inhumane, then you have to open up the debate to all animals being harvested. How do we harvest our animals? We know about cruelty to animals in domesticated ways. We know cruelty to animals in general. But let's look at the situation that we have here. We have a highly regulated harvest of a mammal that represents a commercial value that is great. We do not get as much from it as we used to, holding value of $34 million in 1 year, as far as landed value is concerned, primarily harp seals. But we do understand that by doing the steps that we had made, mandatory training, the three-step process for the harvesting of the animal that makes it humane, these are all international standards looked upon by international animal welfare groups. Some of them said yes, most of them say no. But the problem is the ones who say no do it, in my opinion, in a very selfish manner. I mentioned earlier about deer and boar that are harvested in Germany, and it's less regulated than our hunt. The problem with that is the reason why it's not highlighted as much is because putting a deer or a boar animal on the front of a pamphlet to raise money doesn't work as well as putting a seal pup on there now, is there? Therein lies the problem that we've been going through for many, many, many years. You look at the seal pup itself when it's born, it has the white fur. They use that as a way of putting forward their mission to raise money for their individual group. Demagoguery at the worst. Because what we have here is a situation where we don't harvest that animal. It's much older than that. And therefore, I guess in the past, the most frustrating part is that the myths that keep going out there, we keep battling against these myths, but yet we keep getting pushed back because those myths keep circulating about how it is that we harvest an animal. No different than any other animal harvest around the world. For those people, a brief story. I had an argument with a British member of Parliament one day, and he said he didn't like the seal hunt simply because he didn't like the way we harvested the animal, the way in which it was done. So I guess in a matter of, I didn't want to be too angry. I want to be intelligent about it, or at least try to be. And I said to him, I said, you know, your leather shoe. And he shook his head and said, I know what you're going to say. I'm wearing leather. It comes from a cow. but that's a domesticated animal. Now, I'm sure the cow didn't really care if it was domesticated or not. It was about to face its ultimate demise. But nevertheless, I asked him, how was the cow slaughtered? He couldn't tell me. But therein lies the mistruths that are being put out there. And the point of this today is to say that our national seal products are tied to culture, going way, way back. I'll give you an idea how far it goes back. Several hundred years ago, when the mass harvesting of seals took place, the oil from these seals were transported to London. They were excellent fuel for their street lamps. Kind of ironic, because in a way they started the anti-seal hunt campaign with groups such as the International Fund for Animal Welfare and Greenpeace and others. Now, many of these groups have come around to understanding how this harvest takes place. Some have not, however. And we've suffered the wrath of many mistruths of them, and that continues to this very day, unfortunately. But I will say this, from the side, there is an exemption in Europe now for indigenous communities, and we've invested a bit of money. A matter of fact, the former government did as well, around $5.7 million, which I think is a good investment to allow indigenous groups to market their products within Europe and other places. I think this is essential because the marketing help certainly is going to bring in a level of understanding as to how we harvest animals in a humane way, how the respect for indigenous communities as a way of culture, as a way of, and I think also in Nunavut is now doing that, and soon Northwest Territories will embark on the same. And I think that's ideal. I know my colleague from Labrador speaks about this quite a bit. So there are many things that we can do to increase the level of understanding as to how we can get around these lies and myths about seal harvesting that people around the world paint us to be. Yes, we've heard it all. My ancestors were called barbarians for what they did. Someone asked me once, they said, why was it your grandfather took part in killing seals? And I said, I'm not sure. It's something to do with supporting his family, I think it was, if I recall. So I want to say in closing in this debate, I want to talk about the fact that we need to increase this understanding. I was very pleased to see a short time ago when the member from Nunavut, when he was minister, went down to the United States and met President Obama, and he met him with his seal tie on. And I thought that was a very touching moment because we're going to turn the corner. We're going to increase the level of understanding through the indigenous communities and all coastal communities, for that matter. I have many coastal communities that rely on this. There was a time when up to half of a person's income was created from the seal harvest itself, up until about 2010 when the market started suffering. But I do believe the markets will come back. I believe that they will in many reasons. One, seal oil is rich in omega-3. The fur, by which you see here, is a high-quality fur. And the meat is also good as well. And we're making efforts to increase the market awareness in Asia, such as China. Hopefully it will turn out to be a big market. But we need to stay away from these bans of seal products based on myths, not conservation. Back in the 70s, there were less than 2 million harp seals on the East Coast. Now, 7.4 million. Plentiful indeed, to the point where there are some nations who actually kill seals because they're getting in the way of the ecosystem. What's their excuse? Nevertheless, I want to thank the House for hearing me on this. I look forward to the debate. Any questions? Absolutely. And I look forward to all people's support in this House and S-204. And once again, finally, I'd like to thank Senator Payette for bringing this forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et